The day our divorce was finalized, my ex-husband immediately froze all my assets, intending to see me destitute on the streets. But he had no idea that I had been quietly planning for 8 years, waiting for the day he would walk away with nothing. Do you think this is another story of a divorced woman thrown out, weeping and begging, humiliated to her core? You're wrong. This is the story of a trap I patiently wove, thread by thread, for 8 years, so that today I could be the one to pull it shut, to close the lid on the coffin of a man who thought he was a king. The day we signed the papers, he was so eager that the moment we stepped out of the courthouse, he was on the phone, ordering his banker to freeze every account connected to my name. He wanted to see me kneel. He wanted to hear me beg. He wanted to watch me tremble without a single dollar to my name. He smirked the smirk of a man accustomed to treating his wife like a shadow. He was laughing at my stupidity, laughing that without him, I had nothing. But he didn't know that from the first year I stepped into that home, I had started living like someone who was already leaving. I learned to smile when I was dismissed, to stay silent when I was belittled, to nod when I was controlled. And most importantly, I learned to hide myself under the guise of the perfect wife until I was strong enough to strike back with absolute precision. My name is Evelyn. Today is the day Julian and I finalized our divorce. Before leaving the penthouse on the Upper East Side, I paused for a moment to take one last look. 7 years I'd lived there, walking on cold marble floors that felt like ice. The apartment was beautiful to the point of being sterile. Everything gleamed, but there was no warmth. I felt no regret. What I felt was lightness, as if a choke collar I'd worn for too long had finally been removed. Julian sat in the back of the black luxury sedan, the tinted window lowered only halfway, as if to maintain a distance. He wore a gray tailored suit, a high-end watch glittering on his wrist. That polished image once made me proud. Now, all I saw was a hollow, glossy shell. "What are you standing there for?" he growled. "Hurry up, I have a meeting at 10:30. I didn't answer. I pulled open the car door and sat down. The air inside was so cold I felt like a sharp breath could frost the windows. The driver, George, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. I knew that look of pity all too well. People pitied me because they thought I was the loser. 32 years old, a stay-at-home wife for 7 years. No career, no money, no connections, nothing. The husband gets bored, he leaves. The wife gets kicked out, she ends up on the street. It's the familiar story society tells to keep women scared and obedient. The car stopped in front of the courthouse. Julian strode ahead, as if a single second's delay would cost him his sense of control. I followed, my steps even, my heart unnervingly calm. Everything happened quickly. A judge's stamp, 2 thin documents that felt as heavy as a lifetime of shame. I had barely held the decree long enough for it to warm in my hand when Julian's lips curled into his first smile of the day, and his last. "Evelyn," he said, his voice slow, as if bestowing a great favor. "After all, we were married. I'm not so cruel as to leave you with no way to survive." He took his copy, placed it in his briefcase, and looked me straight in the eye, savoring every tremor he expected to see. "I canceled your supplementary credit card yesterday. All the payment apps on your phone, I've disconnected them. And that debit card," he chuckled. "Oh, right. You don't have a salary. The one I transfer your allowance to, I've frozen that too." I looked up, making sure my eyes were just wide enough, my throat tightening like someone about to collapse. "Julian, why would you do that?" He was pleased. He leaned in, lowering his voice, but every word was a hammer blow. "From this moment on, you don't have a single cent. I've already had the locks on the penthouse changed. I told the housekeeper to pack your things. They're with the doorman. Oh, and your parents' house out on Long Island. Didn't you use their deed to secure a loan for your brother's business 6 months ago? I hear the bank is getting pretty aggressive about it." He watched me like an audience watching a play. "How are you going to live? Sleep under a bridge, go crying back to your parents' house, and live on memories?" His voice was thick with a cruel, triumphant joy. "Kneel and beg me. Maybe I'll feel soft and give you a few thousand for a cheap room." A clerk at a nearby desk looked up, her expression a strange mix of curiosity, annoyance, and pity. I felt the hand holding the decree tremble, my nails digging into my palm until the skin turned white. Julian thought I was trembling with fear. He was wrong. I was trembling from biting my lips so hard to keep from laughing. 8 years. Julian, you haven't changed. Still the same habit of grinding people under your heel and then asking if it hurts, as if it were a game. I took a breath and lowered my gaze, letting tears well up at just the right moment. I acted with the emotions that were once real, from the early years. It was easy. "Do you really have to be so heartless?" I asked, my voice choked. He laughed. "Heartless? This is me teaching you a lesson about reality. The reality, Evelyn, is that without me, you are nothing. Now get out of my sight. Don't pollute my view." He turned his back, his posture straight and confident, the posture of someone who had just thrown out a bag of trash and felt relieved. I stood perfectly still, watching his car pull away. When its taillights disappeared around the corner, the victim's mask on my face receded, as neatly as pulling off a layer of skin. I raised a hand and wiped away the single tear at the corner of my eye, a tear I had forced out, not one born of pain. I opened the handbag I'd carried for 5 years, reached deep into a hidden pocket in the lining, and pulled out an old, scratched burner phone that no one would ever look at twice. I pressed a single speed dial button. It rang once before someone picked up. A crisp, young female voice. "Evelyn?" "Chloe, what's the situation?" I asked, my own voice perfectly calm. "Just as we predicted. He's locked everything down." I looked at the decree in my hand, then in the direction Julian had gone, a corner of my mouth lifting into a smile. "Excellent." I paused, as if naming a storm. "Let's begin. Activate Project Cyclone. Notify all parties. I want everything moving in perfect sync." I ended the call and slipped the old phone back into the bottom of my bag. To the people behind me, I was just another woman kicked out of her home. But I had just pushed the button to start a machine, and the man standing in the middle of it was Julian. Leaving the courthouse, I didn't call an Uber. I walked, deliberately. The New York sun hadn't reached its peak, but the heat was already radiating in waves from the pavement. I pulled the brim of my hat low, letting sweat soak the back of my shirt, letting people see a newly divorced woman, penniless and lost in the sprawling city. The glances I received, pity, curiosity, indifference, I needed them all. I needed this entire city to believe I had hit rock bottom. I turned onto a side street and sat on a metal bench at a bus stop. I opened my hand. Inside were only a few crumpled bills, a 20, a 10, some loose change. The perfect prop for a performance of destitution. I counted it again, making sure the person next to me could see. An old woman selling newspapers looked at me and sighed. "Tough breakup, honey?" she asked, her Brooklyn accent thick. I nodded, my eyes just red enough. "You look like a good kid. It'll pass." I managed a grateful smile. I'd heard condolences like that for 7 years. Every time Julian humiliated me in front of his family, I heard them. I'd grown so used to it. I knew exactly how much to lower my head to avoid further questions. The bus arrived. I paid in cash, took a seat at the back, and inhaled the mixed scent of people, exhaust, and the city. In my mind, a timeline lit up like traffic signals. From the moment Julian froze my accounts, the clock had started ticking. In 3 hours, his company's finance department would receive the liquidity report. In 6 hours, his major partner in New Jersey would call about a broken supply chain payment. In 24 hours, rumors would begin to spread among investors. I didn't need to rush things. I just needed to not be slow. The bus reached its last stop. I got off, pulling a small, worn suitcase I had packed a week ago. Inside were only a few simple outfits, a pair of flat shoes, and some thin notebooks. I walked into a narrow street in Queens, with flickering signs for diners, auto repair shops, and walk-up apartments packed tightly together. This was the city within the city, cramped, noisy, but anonymous. Anonymity was what I needed. The apartment was on the second floor of a building with a narrow staircase and rusted iron railings. The landlady opened the door and looked me up and down. "You alone?" "Yes. 1 month's deposit. Small room, shared bathroom." I nodded and handed her the cash. The landlady glanced at the crumpled bills and sighed. "All right, let me know if you need anything." The door closed behind me. The room was bare, containing only a metal bed frame, an old fan, and a single yellow light bulb. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. The sound of traffic from the street below echoed in the room. I waited for 5, then 10 minutes, giving anyone who might be watching enough time to report that I had moved into a squalid little room. Then, from the bottom of my suitcase, I took out another phone, a slim, modern smartphone with a full battery and strong signal. I called Chloe, the only person besides my lawyer who knew the full scope of the plan. "Report," end quote. "He's frozen everything, just like you predicted. But don't worry, the 3 backup accounts under the Shell Corporation are still active. The cash flow is secure." "Good. What about the New Jersey partner?" "They just sent an email asking about this week's payment." "Don't reply yet. Let them get anxious." I hung up. Haste makes waste. I couldn't afford to be hasty. That evening, I went to a diner at the end of the street and bought a $15 container of food. I paid with small bills. The owner looked at me with pity and added an extra scoop of mashed potatoes. I took it back to my room and ate slowly, leaving the window open to let the streetlights cast shadows on the wall. I needed these small details to nurture the narrative of my poverty. A picture of the takeout box, the yellow light, the peeling paint on the wall, all of it would be deployed at the right place, at the right time. At 9 p.m., the burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard you got kicked out." I knew who it was. Tiffany, the wife of one of Julian's close business partners, a woman who thrived on gossip. I replied simply, "Yeah, just rented a room." The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared for a long time. Julian can be so cruel. I didn't reply. My silence would be interpreted in the most advantageous way for me. At 11 p.m., I turned off the light and lay on the metal bed, the fan creaking overhead. I closed my eyes, and in my mind, I reopened the invisible ledger from 8 years ago. The first year of our marriage, Julian had given me a supplementary card. "Spend it on the household," he'd said, his tone magnanimous. "If you need anything, just ask." I had whispered a small thank you. From that day on, every time I went grocery shopping, I saved a few dollars, a few dozen each month, a few hundred each year. I kept meticulous records. At night, while he slept, I taught myself how to read financial reports. I had my lawyer, Tom, open an account in a trust's name and learned how to make slow, steady investments. I didn't need big wins. I just needed to survive. A small noise in the hallway pulled me back to the present. Someone was walking past. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't afraid. The greatest fear of my life had been left behind in that penthouse, along with the sound of Julian's laughter. The next morning, I woke up early. I put on an old blouse, black pants, and tied my hair back. I went to a coffee shop on the corner and ordered the cheapest black coffee. I sat in a corner, took out a small notebook, and started scribbling. To an outsider, I was just an unemployed woman journaling aimlessly. No one knew I was mapping the cash flow of a company that was about to run out of air. The phone buzzed. "Chloe." The New Jersey partner called a second time. Their tone is getting sharp. Atelden Arley cared. "Good, let them. The bank should be sending a reminder notice soon." Right on schedule. I sipped the bitter coffee. I remembered how Julian hated bitter things. He liked sweet, things that were easy to swallow. That was his weakness. Then, a call from another unknown number. I answered. "Evelyn." "Yes. Are you available?" "I have an administrative position open at my company. The pay isn't high, but it's stable. If you could actively for this manapart of liss." I paused for 2 seconds, then replied in a voice mixed with gratitude and anxiety. "Thank you. Could I have a little time to think about it?" "Of course. Take your time." I hung up. I knew this was the first lure. A small hook with tasty bait, cast out to see if I was really starving. I would bite. But not yet. That afternoon, I went back to my room, changed, and walked to the bus station. I stood there for a long time, watching people come and go. I needed more witnesses for my story of having nowhere to go. I let a few tears fall at just the right moment. That evening, I received a text from Julian. Just one line. "Have you come to your senses yet?" I looked at the screen and let out a soft, silent laugh. I replied, "Give me some time." 3 minutes later, he responded, "Don't test my patience." I put the phone down. His patience was the most fragile thing in the world. I knew that. That night, I opened my slim smartphone and sent a short email. No subject line. The only attachment was a risk analysis of a real estate project near an industrial park, an analysis I had prepared a long, long time ago. The recipient was an address I had memorized for 2 years but had never used. After sending it, I turned off the phone. The first gust of wind had begun to blow, and tomorrow, the sky over Julian's world would begin to change color. On the third morning after the divorce, I woke while the sky was still a dim gray. The small room smelled of dampness, mixed with the lingering scent of last night's rain. I sat up, opened the window, and took a deep breath. The early morning air in this poor neighborhood had a raw, unfiltered quality to it. It reminded me that without vigilance, a person could slide to the very bottom. I washed my face with cold water, looking at myself in the small mirror on the wall. The mirror was foggy, but the eyes looking back were clear. Calm. Not joyful, not bitter, just the focused gaze of someone walking a tightrope. I needed to maintain my rhythm. Every step now had to be perfectly measured. I put on an old blouse, carried a canvas tote bag, and walked to the end of the street. The bagel cart was open. I bought the cheapest one and paid in cash. The vendor gave me an extra packet of cream cheese. "To get you through the day, dear." I nodded. I needed comments like that, not for comfort, but to let the story spread naturally. In neighborhoods like this, news traveled faster than the press. I went to the same coffee shop as yesterday and sat at the same table. I opened my notebook, wrote a few meaningless lines, then crossed them out. In reality, I was waiting for a call, and it came, right on time. The phone buzzed. "Chloe." The bank sent the notice. "Good. Have our contact send him a copy, but delay it until just before closing time." The New Jersey partner just messaged. They said if payment is delayed another 2 days, they'll reconsider the contract. Excellent. Don't reply. I hung up and sipped my coffee. I pictured Julian in his glass-walled conference room, tapping his fingers on the table, his voice starting to rise. He hated losing control more than anything, and I was eroding that control, bit by bit. Around 10 a.m., I got a call from the person who offered me a job yesterday. "Miss Evelyn? About that admin position, if you're interested, you can come in for a chat this afternoon." I paused for 2 seconds, then replied, "Yes, that would be great, thank you." I knew this wasn't about a job, it was a test. They wanted to see if I still had any self-respect left. I would show them I was desperate, but not degraded. That afternoon, I went to an office building in a less glamorous part of Midtown. The lobby was small, the elevator old. The interviewer was a middle-aged man with a monotone voice. He looked at my empty resume and nodded. "You've been out of the workforce for a while." "Yes, I was taking care of my family." "And now you're divorced?" I lowered my head. "Yes." He studied me more closely, as if weighing something. "The salary is low. The work is repetitive. Can you handle that?" I nodded, just quickly enough to show my eagerness, but slow enough not to seem pathetic. "I just need something stable." He smiled, the smile of a man who thinks he holds all the power. "All right, I'll be in touch." Leaving the building, I stood outside for a few minutes. I knew someone would report back to Julian that I was looking for a low-paying job, willing to take anything. I needed him to believe that. On the way back, I stopped at a small electronics store and asked about a prepaid SIM card. The clerk looked at me and quoted a price. I paid. He handed it over without another question. I needed another untraceable line of communication. Back in my room, I locked the door, sat on the bed, and opened my slim smartphone. A reply had arrived from the address I'd emailed last night. No subject, just one line. Meet me tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. Riverside Park. I looked at the words, my heart rate steady. He had taken the bait, but big fish always fight hard. I needed to be prepared. That evening, Julian called. I answered after the third ring. What the hell are you doing? His voice was sharp. I let a beat of silence pass. What are you talking about? The bank sent a notice. My partners are calling me non-stop. What have you been saying to people? I let out a soft laugh, making my voice tremble slightly. I haven't said anything. I don't even know about your business affairs. He snorted. Don't play dumb. I know you're not as simple as you look. I made a sound like a swallow. You think too highly of me. Silence. I could hear his breathing on the other end of the line. Evelyn, he said slowly, I'm giving you one more chance. Come back and talk to me. I can give you some financial support. Support. The word he had used with me for 7 years. I closed my eyes, picturing the nights I had spent hunched over financial reports in the kitchen. I need time. I don't have much patience. I know. I hung up first a small act, but enough to annoy him. That night, I repacked my suitcase. I chose my plainest outfit clean, but not eye-catching. I needed to appear as a woman fresh out of a marriage, with no jewelry, no glow. I put the burner phone in an outer pocket and the slim smartphone in an inner one. The next morning, I arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early. The sky was clear, the breeze light. A man sat on a bench with his back to me, his posture straight, wearing a white shirt and dark pants. As I approached, he turned. His eyes were sharp, but not judgmental. Evelyn? Yes. You must be Mr. Harrison. I sat on the bench across from him. No handshake, no pleasantries. Your analysis, he said, is very interesting. Where did you get this data? From what I lived with. End quote. He raised an eyebrow. Do you know who you're dealing with? I do. And what do you want? I looked him straight in the eye. I want the truth to be seen, and I need a legitimate platform to stand on. He gave a very slight smile. And you think I'll just believe you? I don't need you to believe me right away. I just need you to verify. I took a thin stack of papers from my tote bag and placed it on the bench. These are the inconsistencies in his last quarterly financial report. This is the legal risk associated with that parcel of land. And this, I paused, is the cash flow he thinks no one can see. Mr. Harrison silently flipped through the pages. The wind rustled the edges of the paper. Time seemed to slow down. Finally, he looked up. You're calmer than I expected, because I've been waiting a long time. He nodded. All right, I'll have my people look into this. But you have to understand, once we start, there's no turning back. I smiled. I ran out of ways to turn back the day he froze my accounts. We stood up. He handed me his business card. Wait for my call. I took it without looking. I knew the game had just entered a new phase. On the way back, the burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, heard you met with a stranger. I didn't reply. I looked up at the sky. Clouds were gathering. The wind had changed direction, and Julian, though he didn't know it yet, was standing right in the eye of the storm. I left the park as the sun climbed higher, its light glinting off the surface of the Hudson like 1,000 tiny blades. Mr. Harrison's business card sat in my pocket, solid and crisp, a confirmation that the chessboard had expanded. I didn't rush to call Chloe. In moments like these, silence was the best way to maintain balance. I walked along the riverfront path, blending in with the morning crowd. An old woman walking her dog, children on bikes, a few middle-aged men jogging slowly. No one looked at me. I liked this feeling of being invisible in a crowd. It allowed me to think without being scrutinized. Returning to my room, I locked the door and drew the curtains. I placed both phones on the table and organized my papers. Every file had a purpose. I didn't let emotion interfere. Emotions were reserved for the rare private moments when night fell. During the day, I was an operator. At 11 a.m. sharp, Chloe called. Mr. Harrison's office has started their verification. They're requesting 2 more sets of documents. Send them the prepared files. Nothing more, nothing less. There's one more thing, Chloe said, her voice dropping. Julian just finished an internal meeting. He lost his temper and slammed his hand on the table. I smiled. That's normal. He's used to using noise to cover up his fear. I hung up and opened my old laptop. The screen was dim, but it worked. I logged into an anonymous email account and checked for replies. Nothing new. I knew that people like Mr. Harrison wouldn't respond quickly. They needed time to confirm I wasn't just some reckless amateur. For lunch, I went to the diner at the end of the street. "What can I get you, honey?" the owner asked. "Same as yesterday, please." She nodded and scooped rice onto a plate. A man at the next table was talking loudly on his phone about loans and deadlines. I heard bits and pieces but didn't try to listen. Stories like that, at this moment, only reminded me of the sound of Julian's increasingly rapid breathing. After eating, I went back to my room and lay down for a short rest. I needed to conserve my energy. The afternoon would bring turbulence. Around 3 p.m., the burner phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "What are you doing?" I read it but didn't reply. 5 minutes later, he called. I answered. "I'm out," I said, my voice tired. "Out where?" "Looking for a job." "A job?" he sneered. "Where?" "Anywhere that pays a salary." He was silent for a few seconds. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "Do you think you can survive on that pocket change?" "I don't have another choice." I made my voice smaller, as if I were about to cry. "Please, don't make this harder for me." He exhaled, his tone softening. "Come back and talk. I can give you a lump sum. Not much, but enough to live on." "It's not due, Axpino." "How much?" I asked, not because I needed to know, but to gauge him. $30,000. I closed my eyes. 30,000. The amount he once spent on a single boozy client dinner. I need to think about it. I won't wait long. I know. I hung up. My hand wasn't shaking. I knew he was losing patience, and impatience leads to mistakes. Immediately after, Chloe texted, "He just asked the legal department to review all joint assets. Let them search. There's nothing to find. He suspects you. Let him suspect." I stood up and opened the window. The sky was turning gray. Clouds were gathering in thick sheets. I liked afternoons like this. They made people's spirits heavier, more prone to slipping. That evening, I received an email from Mr. Harrison. Just one line. "Tomorrow, 8:30 a.m., my office." I replied simply, "Understood." I knew this was the second confirmation. If I passed this, I would officially enter a different arena, a place where law, money, and power spoke a cold, hard language. That night, I prepared carefully. I didn't bring too many documents, only the absolute essentials. I needed to prove I understood where to draw the line. The next morning, I wore a simple white blouse, black pants, and flat shoes. I arrived at Mr. Harrison's office building on time. The building was tall, the lobby spacious, filled with white light. I gave my name at the front desk. An assistant led me to a small conference room. Mr. Harrison arrived 5 minutes after me. He placed a folder on the table. "We've done a preliminary check," he said, "and there are significant issues." He looked at me, his eyes no longer skeptical. "What do you want us to do?" "I want the truth brought to the table, following proper procedure. You know this will make him retaliate. I'm prepared for that." Mr. Harrison nodded. "All right, we'll proceed with a deep dive audit. During this time, you are not to have any direct contact with the subject." "I won't." "One more thing," he added. "You need a better cover, a legitimate position." "I understand." "Can you arrange that?" "Perhaps. But you'll have to prove your capabilities." I smiled. "I've been doing that for 8 years." He stood up and extended his hand. This time, I shook it. The handshake was brief and firm. Leaving the building, I received a text from Julian. "I'm coming to your place tonight." I looked at the words, feeling the loss of control seeping through his message. I replied, "It's not convenient." "Are you hiding from me?" "I'm just tired." The 3 dots appeared for a long time. I will find you. I turned off the screen. I knew he would try. And I also knew that every move he made now would only leave more tracks. I went back to my room and packed a small bag, not to run, but to be ready. I looked around the cramped space and suddenly, it no longer felt temporary. It was a transfer station, a place where I had stood firm when everything else was collapsing. Outside, the rain began to fall, heavy, relentless drops. I sat on the bed, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line. Phase 2. The opponent reveals himself. I underlined it. This rain wasn't just going to wet the streets. The rain fell for a long time that night. I sat with my back against the wall, listening to the drops drumming on the roof, a steady rhythm for the thoughts in my head. Julian said he would find me. I believed him. That man had never gotten used to being refused, especially by me. Around 11 p.m., the burner phone rang. I knew who it was without looking at the screen. I let it ring 6 times before answering. Where are you? His voice was low but strained, like an over-tightened guitar string. I'm resting. Where? In my room. If you telegrammed on the workstay address. I remained silent. The silence stretched just long enough for him to think I was scared. Evelyn, he growled, don't play this game with me. What do you want, Julian? I want to talk. We're divorced. Divorce doesn't give you the right to sabotage my business. I let out a soft laugh, just loud enough for him to hear. I don't have that kind of power. He fell silent. I could hear his breathing mixed with the sound of the rain. I'm nearby, he said. Open the door. End quote. I stood up, walked to the window, and peered down into the street. A black sedan was parked at the corner, its lights off. I knew he wouldn't come in. This neighborhood wasn't like the places he was used to. It's not a good time. I'm not asking for your opinion. Go home, Julian, I said, my voice slow and clear. If you come in here, you'll only make things worse. Are you threatening me? No, I replied. I'm advising you. I hung up. My hand felt warm, but it wasn't shaking. I knew that from this moment on, he would start doing stupid things. The next morning, Chloe called early. He's got people asking around everywhere. Someone saw his car at the end of your street last night. Let them see. Let him lose his temper. Good. I ate a cold bagel for breakfast, chewing slowly as I watched the street begin to fill with people. Life here went on, indifferent to the storms brewing somewhere far away. Around 9 a.m., I got a call from the bank. Miss Evelyn? Regarding the mortgaged asset under your family's name, we need to re-verify some information. Yes, I answered, my voice just anxious enough. Is there a problem? We've received a request for additional documentation from the cosigner. I knew who the cosigner was. I'll sort it out, I said, and hung up. I texted Chloe. He's starting to use my family. Do we need to intervene? Not yet. Let him take one more step. That afternoon, I received an email from the HR department of the company I'd interviewed with. Miss Evelyn, we would like to offer you the position, starting next week. I looked at the words, thought for a few seconds, then replied, I accept, thank you. I needed this job, not for the money, but because it was the perfect piece to complete the puzzle of the down-and-out woman trying to claw her way back. In the late afternoon, I went to Mr. Harrison's office for a brief, scheduled meeting. This time, it wasn't a conference room, but a small private office. He handed me a folder. This is the result of the second phase audit. I flipped through it. The numbers, the red-inked notes, everything was as I had predicted. Does he know yet? I asked. Not officially, but he will soon. Good. Mr. Harrison looked at me, his voice serious. You need to be prepared. When this information comes out, he will retaliate in every way possible. I know about your family. Axley White. I've already arranged for their protection. He nodded. We will maintain our distance until the right moment. You continue to live your life as you have been. I'm very good at that. Leaving his office, I received a text from Julian. Do you really think you've won? I didn't reply. I knew that right now, silence would infuriate him more than any words. That night, back in my room, I changed clothes and lay down. The phone buzzed incessantly. I turned off the ringer. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow would be a long day. The next morning, I went to my new job. The office was small, the work simple. I was diligent and obedient. I wanted everyone to remember me as a quiet, hard-working woman. In the middle of the morning, I received a text from an unknown number. "How long do you think you can hide?" It was Julian, using a different SIM card. I replied, "You're scaring me." The 3 dots appeared. "You should be scared." I put the phone down and took a deep breath. I could feel the circle closing in. But I wasn't standing in the middle of it. I was outside pulling the strings. In the afternoon, Chloe called. He just transferred an unusually large sum of money. Where to? To an intermediary firm. It was very rushed. I closed my eyes. He was digging his own grave. Do we block it? No. Let him do it. That evening, I got a call from my mother, her voice filled with worry. "Evelyn, someone from the bank came by asking questions." End quote. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm handling it. Are you okay?" I bit my lip. "I'm okay, Mom." After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. This was the only moment of the day I allowed myself to feel tired. But being tired didn't mean retreating. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote another line. Opponent beginning to lose financial control. I underlined it. Outside, a car engine revved and then faded. I glanced out the window. The familiar black sedan drove past the end of the street without stopping. Julian was running, and I was waiting. The next morning, online financial blogs began to run vague articles about a real estate firm facing cash flow problems. No names were mentioned, but it was enough for those in the know to understand. My phone buzzed constantly. I didn't answer. I knew that from now on, Julian would no longer be in control. He would be reacting. And reactions made in panic always reveal weaknesses. I closed my notebook and got ready for work. Before leaving the room, I took one last look around. I had stood firm here when I was pushed to the very edge. Now, it was my turn to step forward. That morning, I walked out of my room with a clear sense that there was no turning back. Not because I was afraid, but because everything had passed the point of no return. The street was the same, noisy, dusty. People were laughing, bargaining, living their very ordinary days. I blended in, wearing my most ordinary expression, while inside, every gear began to turn faster. I arrived at work on time. 10 minutes after I turned on my computer, the office was buzzing. A coworker leaned in close. "Did you hear the news?" "What news?" "Some big real estate company is being investigated. The execs are in a panic." I looked up, feigning surprise. "Really?" "Yeah. My friend at a bank said their cash flow is a mess." I nodded without saying more. The rumor had reached the lowest level. That meant on the top floor, the panic had truly begun. Around 10 a.m., the burner phone buzzed. "Chloe, he's called an emergency meeting. Lawyers are present." "What's he asking?" "About you." I smiled. "What about me?" "He's asking if you've been in contact with anyone, if there's someone behind you." And no one has an answer. I hung up. I knew Julian was searching every corner of his memory, trying to figure out who I could possibly be relying on. But for 8 years, I had done an excellent job of making myself seem harmless. At lunch, I ate alone. I needed space to think. Mr. Harrison had said the rumors would precede the official documents. And when the documents arrived, it wouldn't be a single blow, but a series of them. I had to make sure I wasn't at the center of the storm too soon. At 2 p.m. sharp, I received an internal email about a short training session on financial compliance. I signed up immediately. I needed to appear in multiple legitimate places with a clear work trail. During the training, my phone buzzed repeatedly. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. I didn't answer. Then a text. "Do you think you're so smart?" I didn't reply. Another text followed immediately. "Don't push me." I placed the phone face down on the table. I knew he was trying to drag me into an emotional confrontation. I wouldn't step into that trap. After work, just as I stepped out of the building, I saw the familiar black sedan parked across the street. My heart beat a little faster, but my face remained calm. I walked straight ahead, not looking over. The car door flew open. "Evelyn!" His voice called my name in the middle of the street, completely ignoring the stares of passers-by. I stopped and turned. "What are you doing here? Get in the car." "No." He strode over, blocking my path. His face was more gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, his tie crooked. "You're coming with me. I don't want to make a scene." "You're already making a scene," I said, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "Go home. You think these little games of yours are fooling me? I don't know what you're talking about." He let out a harsh, distorted laugh. "Who did you meet? What did you send them?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You're scared." A second of silence. I saw the flicker of uncertainty. "I'm not scared," he growled. "You're scared," I repeated, my voice even. "That's why you're here." He reached out and grabbed my wrist. The grip wasn't strong, but it was enough for me to feel his loss of control. "Let go," I said. "You're coming with me." "Let go," I repeated, louder this time. A few people nearby started to look. A security guard approached. "Is there a problem here?" Julian froze. I used that moment to pull my arm free. "It's nothing," I told the guard. "Just a misunderstanding, with an acquaintance." The guard looked between us and nodded, but his eyes were wary. Julian took a step back. "You think I'm going to let this go? I don't need you to let anything go. You'll regret this." I looked at him slowly. "You've said that before." I turned and walked away. This time, he didn't follow. When I got back to my room, I locked the door and leaned against it for a few seconds. Not out of fear, but to confirm one thing. He had just left a trail in front of a witness. I opened my phone and sent a short text to Mr. Harrison. Subject made contact, attempted to apply pressure at my workplace. Less than 10 minutes later, he replied, "Noted." That evening, Chloe called. "He's trying to secure another loan, but many places are turning him down. Because of the rumors, because his profile is starting to look bad." "Good. Are you worried he'll do something reckless?" I paused for a beat. "Yes, which is why we have to be quick." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of Julian standing in the street, his eyes wild, was vivid in my mind. The man who once believed he controlled everything was now being consumed by his own panic. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Opponent made direct contact, beginning to make public mistakes." I underlined it 3 times. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window. I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the official documents would arrive, and when they did, none of this would be a rumor anymore. The next morning, I woke up very early, not from insomnia, but because my body had grown accustomed to being one step ahead. Faint sunlight filtered through the window of the small room, illuminating the desk covered in notes. I made coffee, drank it slowly, and reviewed everything I had written over the past few months. Every timeline was aligning perfectly, not a beat off. It made me feel strangely calm. I went to my new job earlier than usual. The atmosphere was different. People were gathered in small groups, whispering. Others were staring at their computers, but their eyes kept darting around. Around 9 a.m., all employees were instructed to remain at their desks. An internal email was sent out, requesting full cooperation with an investigative team that would be on site for the day. The air in the office froze. I could hear nervous breaths, the shifting of chairs. A few people stood up in alarm, then sat back down. But not me. I had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. About 15 minutes later, a group of people walked in. Dark suits, official badges clearly visible. No one said much, but their presence alone silenced the entire floor. They went straight to the executive offices. The glass doors closed behind them. I kept my head down, working as I always did. Near noon, Chloe texted. "It started." I replied simply, "Stick to the plan." She sent back a single dot. I understood. No one had an appetite for lunch that day. I still ate my cheap takeout, chewing slowly. The feeling wasn't triumph, but a familiar kind of emptiness. When a goal is within reach, the excitement fades, leaving only a cold, clear focus. In the early afternoon, my phone rang. Julian's number. I stared at it for a few seconds, then answered. "What did you do?" His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. "I'm at work." "You think you've won, don't you? This isn't a game of winning or losing." He laughed, a ragged sound. "Don't pretend. You pushed me to this." "You walked here yourself," I said. "You think this is enough to destroy me?" "I think the law is enough." A long silence followed. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end. "What do you want?" I closed my eyes for a second. "I want you to stop. Don't touch my family. You think I have anything left to lose?" "You do," I said softly. "Your last shred of dignity." He laughed, but the sound was broken. "You always were so moral." "No," I replied. "I'm just not like you." "If Whitnett." I hung up before he could say anything else. That afternoon, information began to leak. A few financial news sites published short articles using very cautious language, allegations of misconduct under investigation. But for those in the industry, it was enough. At the end of the workday, I was called into an HR meeting, not just me, but my entire department. They announced a temporary freeze on several projects and asked for our cooperation in providing information if requested. I signed the acknowledgement form. My signature was steady. Leaving the building, I saw Julian in the parking garage. He looked like he had just recovered from a severe illness. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, his eyes darting back and forth. "We need to talk," he said. "Not here. Are you scared? I don't want you causing more trouble." He laughed, but only for a second. "I've lost everything." "You still have the option to cooperate. You make it sound so simple." He stepped closer. "Do you know what I used to think? I don't care. I thought you would drown after the divorce." I looked at him for a long time. "You were wrong. You never loved me." "I did," I said. "But love doesn't mean enduring forever." He staggered back, leaning against his car. "I don't understand." "You don't have to," I replied. "You just have to take responsibility." A man from the legal team walked over and said something to him. Julian nodded, then turned back to me. "You won't get away with this." "Neither will you," I said. He got in his car and slammed the door. That night, I didn't go back to my room. I went to Chloe's apartment. She opened the door and hugged me tightly. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay. He's been summoned for more questioning." "I know." We sat on the floor and ate instant noodles. From the balcony, the city lights sparkled. Chloe looked at me for a long time. "Do you have any regrets?" I thought for a moment. "No." End quote. "Are you tired?" "Yes." "Then why did you do it?" I took a sip of water. "Because if I didn't, I would be tired for the rest of my life." I slept soundly that night. The next morning, the official news broke. No more vagueness. Julian's name was mentioned alongside a list of projects and allegations of fraud. The comment sections were flooded. Some offered pity, others reveled in his downfall. I didn't read them. I received a text from Mr. Harrison. "Phase 1 complete." I replied, "Initiate Phase 2. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer. He showed me the case file, explaining each step. Everything was within the legal framework, with no room for emotion. As I left, I paused in front of a mirror in the elevator. The woman looking back at me was very different from the one 8 years ago. Not harder, just clearer. That evening, I called my mom. "Have you eaten, Mom?" "I have." "Don't you worry about us. Has anyone been bothering you?" "No." "You did the right thing, honey." I fell silent for a few seconds. "I'm sorry for making you worry. As long as you're living well, I'm at peace." I hung up and sat by the window. The wind was gentle. The city was still noisy. Life went on. I opened my notebook and wrote the day's final entry. Opponent beginning to collapse from within. I underlined it. This wasn't the end. It was just the moment everything was brought into the light. And when the light shines, no secret can survive for long. After the news broke, The city didn't change, but the undercurrents beneath it churned more violently. I woke up early, washed my face with cold water, and looked in the mirror. The initial elation was gone, replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. This was a dangerous phase. People often assumed a fallen opponent couldn't get back up. I knew Julian wouldn't give up. He was never the type to accept defeat quietly. I went to my lawyer's office as scheduled. Mr. Pierce, recommended by Mr. Harrison, was a quiet man who spoke little, but every word was concise and carried weight. He handed me a thick folder. "We will proceed step by step," he said. "You don't need to be in the spotlight. Let the documents do the talking." "What about our assets?" I asked. "He's trying to contest the settlement, but the record of him freezing your accounts and applying pressure post-divorce gives you a strong advantage." I nodded. I didn't need to win fast. I needed to win for good. Leaving the law office, I got a text from Chloe. "He's been summoned a second time. Signs of unusual cash withdrawals. Document everything." "There's something else," Chloe hesitated. "He called me." "Called you?" "He asked about you. Asked what you might still have." I smiled. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know." "Good." I ate lunch alone. I skimmed a few headlines. Julian's name appeared more frequently, accompanied by speculation and analysis. I didn't care what outsiders said. I only cared about the case file and the timeline. Early that afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. "Evelyn?" "Yes. This is Catherine, an old friend of Julian's." I paused for a second. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to talk." "About what?" "About Julian. He's in a very bad place." I looked out the window. "That's no longer my concern." "I know," Catherine sighed. "But you were his wife. What do you want?" A moment of silence. "He said if you drop the claims, he'll compensate you." I let out a small, sharp laugh. "Please tell him," I said slowly, "that I am not dropping anything, nor am I accepting any compensation. Evelyn, he could do something reckless. I'm prepared for that." I hung up. I knew calls like this would continue. People would use old ties, pity, social pressure. I had come too far to turn back for any of that. That evening, I returned to my small room. I wasn't moving out yet. I needed more time to finalize everything in quiet. An envelope was propped against my door. I picked it up. Inside was a handwritten note in Julian's script. "Let's talk one last time." I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. One last time is a concept for people who still have hope. I didn't. That night, my father called. "Someone came by asking about you." "Who?" "Said he was a friend of your ex-husband." "What did you say?" "I said you weren't here." I closed my eyes. "You did the right thing, Dad. Be careful, honey." "I will." After hanging up, I called Mr. Harrison. "The opponent is starting to use third parties." "I anticipated that," he replied. "We have protection measures in place." "Thank you. Remember," he added, "no private contact." "I won't." End quote. The next morning, I went to work early. Just as I sat down, HR called me to a conference room. "The investigators have a few more questions." I nodded and followed them. Two men sat waiting, their voices calm. "Miss Evelyn, you were formerly married to Mr. Julian Croft." "Yes." "Do you have any knowledge of his personal cash flows?" "I was not involved in his finances." "When did your marriage end?" "Not long ago." They took notes, asked a few more questions. I answered truthfully, without embellishment. The truth, when told at the right time, is a powerful weapon. Leaving the room, I exhaled slowly. Not from fear, but because I knew everything had just shifted to another level. No more rumors, no more vague threats, only case files and the law. That afternoon, Chloe called, her voice somber. "He's been taken into custody for questioning." I was silent. "Did you hear me?" "Yes." "Are you okay?" "I'm okay." Tensure opens. I stood up and walked to the small balcony outside the office. The sky was overcast, but it wasn't raining. That night, I went back to my room and packed my things. I didn't need to stay here anymore. I had played my part. I looked around the room, touching the peeling paint on the wall. This place had witnessed me rise from nothing. I closed the door and pulled my suitcase behind me. I moved into Chloe's spare room temporarily. She made me a cup of tea. "Do you think it's almost over?" "No," I said. "We're only halfway there." "What's next?" "The confrontation." That night, I got a call from Mr. Pierce. "The other party has requested mediation. Their condition is a reduced sentence." "My position is no mediation," I said. "Proceed according to the law." The lawyer paused for a beat. "I understand." I hung up and sat by the window, looking at the distant city lights. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I just felt that I was on the right path. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Opponent seeks an escape route. Denied." I underlined it. Tomorrow, I would face the past directly, not to hold on, but to finally close the door. The day of the confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. I woke while the city was still hazy, sitting by Chloe's window and watching the skyscrapers shrouded in a thin mist. Before, the thought of seeing Julian again would make my chest tighten, but not this morning. Inside me was a quiet emptiness, like a lake whose sediment had finally settled. Mr. Pierce called me at 7 a.m. "We'll meet at my office at 9. The other side has confirmed their attendance." "Understood. Remember," he added, "do not answer anything beyond what I permit." "I will." I hung up and got dressed. I chose a simple, neutral-colored dress, professional enough. I didn't want to stand out, nor did I want to appear weak. I just needed to be exactly what I was, a person who had left a marriage and was now protecting her legal rights. On the way to the law office, I received a text from an unknown number. "Evelyn, it's me." I didn't reply. When the car stopped in front of the building, I took a deep breath. I had imagined this moment so many times, but the reality was different. There was no thunderclap, no racing heart, just a single footstep onto cold stone. The mediation room was on the 5th floor. When I walked in, Julian was already there. He was visibly thinner, his eyes lacking their former sharpness, though he was still trying to maintain his old air of confidence. Beside him sat a young, tense-looking lawyer. Julian watched me for a long moment. "You're here." I nodded without speaking and sat down next to my lawyer. Mr. Pierce placed his folder on the table and opened it calmly. The mediation began with dry, familiar legal jargon. I listened, answering only when asked. Julian did not. He repeatedly interrupted, trying to inject emotion into the proceedings. "She knew the company's situation perfectly well," he said, pointing a finger at me. "She's not innocent." Mr. Pierce looked at him coolly. "Please provide your evidence, Mr. Croft." Julian froze. I'm just telling the truth." "The truth requires proof," Mr. Pierce replied. I looked at Julian. In that moment, I saw his powerlessness so clearly, not because he was losing, but because for the first time, he couldn't use his voice to dominate the room. Then it was my turn. "Miss Evelyn," the mediator said, "what are your hopes for this session?" "I want this matter to be handled strictly according to the law," I replied. "Nothing more, nothing less. Are you willing to reduce your claims if the other party shows good faith?" I shook my head. "No." The room fell silent. Julian turned to me. "Do you really want to push me to the very end?" I met his gaze calmly. "You walked there yourself." His lawyer whispered something to him. Julian closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. "If I agree to financial restitution, would you put in a good word for me?" I tilted my head slightly. "Are you asking me for a favor?" He gave a forced smile. "You were my wife." I was silent. In that moment, 7 years of memories flashed by. The parties where I stood behind him. The times I had to ask for an allowance. The nights I listened silently as he lectured me. I let it all pass through me, and then I spoke. "It is precisely because I was your wife that I cannot do otherwise." The mediation ended after an hour, with no agreement reached. As we were all standing up, Julian stopped me at the door. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "I know I was wrong, but you didn't have to go this far." "You're mistaken," I replied. "I didn't go this far. I just stopped at the right time." You never gave me a chance. I gave you 8 years. He fell silent. I walked past him without a backward glance. Leaving the building, I felt light. Not the lightness of victory, but the lightness of a final cord being cut. That afternoon, I had a scheduled meeting with Mr. Harrison. He listened to my account of the mediation and nodded. A failed mediation is a good thing, he said. Now the case will move faster. I can't instinite it viled. I just want it to be over cleanly. It will be, he replied. But what will you do after? I thought for a moment. I want to work. Where? Somewhere I can use what I know without having to hide. Mr. Harrison smiled. I have a proposal. He handed me a job description. It wasn't flowery or filled with vague promises. It was for a position as a risk analysis consultant. Consider it, he said. I took the paper, my heart at peace. That night, I returned to the apartment and opened the window to let the breeze in. Chloe looked at me. How did it go? One part is done. Are you sad? I shook my head, just a little regretful, not for him, but for all the years I stayed silent. Chloe just poured more tea. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote slowly. Confrontation complete. Emotional ties severed. I underlined the words and closed the book. Outside, the city was bright, and life went on, and I had finally crossed to the other shore. After the mediation, the following days unfolded with a different rhythm. No more frantic calls, no more texts that were half threat, half plea. The silence this time wasn't a frightening void, but the quiet hum of a machine that had switched to automatic. The case was out of my hands, moving along the cold, hard rails of the legal system. I just had to monitor, not push. I started my new job at Mr. Harrison's firm. No welcome party, no loud congratulations, just a small desk, a large monitor, and a stack of reports. I liked that simplicity. It allowed me to focus on what I did best, reading numbers and hearing the story they told. On my first morning, I arrived early. I opened my computer and started reviewing the risk profile of a project under consideration. I read slowly, underlining inconsistencies, making notes in the margins. No one knew I had honed this skill in my kitchen under a dim light while Julian slept. Only I knew, and that was enough. Mid-morning, Mr. Harrison stopped by. Settling in? It feels familiar. He nodded and didn't ask more. I appreciated his respect for boundaries. No one here needed my backstory. They needed my results. At lunch, I got a call from Mr. Pierce. An update, he said. The other side filed a motion to amend some terms in the discovery. It's minor, just a delay tactic. It's unlikely to succeed. I trust you, I said. Keep me informed. Hanging up, I returned to my screen. The work kept my mind from wandering. It kept me grounded. In the afternoon, Chloe texted, "He's under immense pressure. An old acquaintance called me to ask about you." "What did you say?" "That you're working and have moved on." "Good." I knew that at this stage, public opinion would start to split. Some would side with me, some would pity Julian, and some were just curious. I didn't need to engage. Silence was my best shield. That evening, I went back to my apartment and cooked a simple meal. I ate slowly, listening to the sound of boiling water, of a knife on a cutting board, the sounds of ordinary life. I realized it had been a long time since I had cooked for myself with such peace of mind. Before, every meal was tied to duty, to a judgmental gaze. Not anymore. After dinner, I called my mother. I started my new job. "Is it going well?" "It is." End quote. "Just take care of yourself." "I will." I hung up and stood by the window. Below, traffic flowed endlessly. I no longer felt the need to hide. I could stand anywhere with my own name, my own job. The following days, my life settled into a rhythm. Work in the morning, home in the evening, reading or making notes at night. I stopped checking the news obsessively. If anything important happened, my lawyer or Mr. Harrison would let me know. One afternoon, Mr. Harrison called me into his office. "There's something I'd like you to do," he said. Join the official due diligence team for the upcoming project. What do I need to prepare? Just do what you've been doing. I nodded. I didn't ask why he trusted me. This trust didn't come from my divorce story. It came from the analyses I had submitted. That evening, I got a text from a familiar unknown number. Julian, my court date is set. I looked at the words, feeling nothing. I just wanted you to know. I put the phone down without replying. These belated announcements no longer had any effect. The next morning, I was invited to an internal strategy meeting. The project was complex, with many risks. I gave a brief presentation, pointing out key areas of concern. The room was quiet. This point will be included in the final report, Mr. Harrison said. The meeting ended. A young colleague smiled at me. That was very clear. Thank you. End quote. It was the first time I had been publicly acknowledged for my competence, not for my role in relation to someone else. That afternoon, Mr. Pierce called. The court date has been finalized. When? Next week. Do I need to appear? Yes, but it will be brief. Understood. I hung up and continued working. I didn't let my emotions interfere. I had learned that, the night before the trial, I wasn't sleepless. I organized my documents, prepared my outfit. I wasn't hoping for anything. I just wanted things to proceed correctly. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse with my lawyer. The hallways were long, the lights white. Julian was sitting on a bench across from me. He looked at me, his eyes tired. I gave him a polite nod. The hearing was quicker than I expected. The file was clear, the evidence overwhelming. When the judge read the verdict, I heard every word distinctly. Not because it was deciding someone's fate, but because it confirmed one thing. I had not imagined my suffering. Leaving the courtroom, Julian called out to me, "Evelyn." I stopped. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. The apology was late, but not meaningless. It just no longer had any power. "I accept it," I said, "but I'm not coming back." He nodded, saying nothing more. I walked outside into the sunlight and took a deep breath. There was no applause, no climactic moment, just a proper ending. That afternoon, I went back to the office and continued my work. Mr. Harrison saw me and said simply, "Congratulations." "Thank you." That night, I went home and opened my notebook. I wrote the final entry for this chapter, "Legal closure. New life begins." I underlined it and closed the book. Outside, the city lights came on. I was no longer on the periphery. I had stepped into the center on my own 2 feet. After the trial, I didn't allow myself to rest immediately. I understood one thing very clearly. When the legal door closes, the door to real life opens. And that's when it's easiest to lose your footing. I returned to the office as usual, feeling a sense of relief, but not letting my guard down. The numbers on the screen were still cold and objective. They didn't care what I had just been through. I liked that. Mr. Harrison gave me a new file, harder, more complex. A project that looked beautiful on the surface. High projected profits, prestigious partners, praised by the media. I read every line carefully and immediately saw the small cracks. Cracks that, if left unaddressed, would become fractures. I made my notes and sent back my comments. Mr. Harrison's reply was brief. Good focus. At lunch, I ate with my colleagues. For the first time, I joined the general conversation without feeling like an outsider. They asked me about my perspective on risk. I answered just enough. No one asked about my old marriage. Perhaps they knew, but they chose not to pry. That respect made me feel like I was in the right place. In the afternoon, I went to the bank with my lawyer to finalize some last procedures related to my parents' property. When the bank clerk stamped the final document, I let out a long breath. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long was finally lifted. I called my father. "It's all done." On the other end of the line, his voice was soft. "That's good. Remember to live for yourself now." I hung up and stood in front of the bank's glass doors, watching the stream of people passing by. So many lives intersecting, none of them knowing the battles the others were carrying. That evening, I went home to my new apartment. It wasn't large, but it was bright and quiet. I unpacked and arranged every little corner myself. Each object placed in its proper place felt like I was rearranging my own life. I hung a small, simple painting. I didn't need much. That night, I had a strange dream. I was standing in the old kitchen of my former home, but no one else was there. No voices, no judging eyes. I woke up and realized I was no longer afraid of my memories. They were now just a part of me, not my shackles. In the following days, I became busier. Work consumed me, but in a positive way. I started leading small analyses. My opinion was sought in meetings. I didn't speak much, but when I did, I was precise. Mr. Harrison noticed. One afternoon, he called me into his office. "Have you thought about going further? Further? More proactive?" Leading a team. I was silent for a few seconds. "I need time." "No rush," he said. "I just want you to know that we see you." I left his office feeling a deep sense of peace. The recognition came at the right time, not too soon, not too late. Chloe visited me on the weekend. We cooked and talked about nothing in particular. She looked at me and smiled. "You're different." "How so?" "Lighter," I thought for a moment. "Because I'm not bracing for impact anymore." "Are you afraid it will all come crashing down again one day?" "Anything can crash," I said. "But this time, I know I can get back up." That evening, I went for a walk alone. The city was lit up. The breeze was cool. I saw busy restaurants, small families, young couples. I didn't compare, I just observed. Everyone has their own rhythm, and I was finding mine. A text came from an unknown number. I opened it. "Evelyn, I'm going abroad for a while. It's Julian. I just wanted to say goodbye." I looked at the screen, thought for a long time, and then, for the first time in months, I replied, "Be well." That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. I put the phone down, feeling another door close gently behind me. The next morning, I went to the office early. I opened a report and started my day. Nothing was pulling me backward. Everything ahead was still uncertain, but it was no longer a fog. At the end of the day, Mr. Harrison sent me an email. "Prepare the proposal for next quarter. I want you to be listed as a co-author." I read that line over and over. Co-author. Not an assistant, not someone behind the scenes. I smiled. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote a new line. No longer living to defend, beginning to live, to build. I underlined it and closed the book. Outside, the night was quiet. I sat by the window, sipping tea, letting that quiet seep into every breath. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I would walk into it on the same 2 feet that had trembled but never collapsed. I entered the new quarter with a completely different mindset. I was no longer an observer on the sidelines, nor someone who had to prove her existence. I was part of the team and, more importantly, someone with responsibility. Mr. Harrison tasked me with leading the risk analysis for a major infrastructure project in the Midwest. Its scale was enough to make anyone cautious. Large capital, long timeline, multiple stakeholders. I knew this was not just a professional challenge but a test of character. My team had 4 people, the youngest 26, the oldest 33. They looked at me in our first meeting with a mix of curiosity and appraisal. I didn't give a long introduction. I said only one thing. "We will work with data and accountability, not with emotion." The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. I started delegating, listening to their opinions, asking questions. I didn't impose. I guided them to see the problem in layers. When the meeting ended, I knew I had chosen the right approach. In the following days, I worked more than usual. Not because I was forced to, but because I wanted to. I read reports late into the night, double-checking every assumption, every number. It was tiring, but it was the pleasant fatigue of someone who is building something, not just defending against its collapse. One afternoon, as I was editing an analysis, Mr. Harrison stopped by. "Getting used to the new role?" "Still have a lot to learn." "That's a good answer." He glanced at the draft on my screen. "What do you see as the biggest risk?" "It's not financial," I replied. "It's governance." If we can't control the overlapping interests, everything will fall apart. Mr. Harrison nodded. Exactly. Keep going in that direction. I knew trust was being built, bit by bit, through work, not promises. Meanwhile, my personal life was also finding its equilibrium. I grew accustomed to my small apartment, to the quiet evenings. I no longer checked my phone reflexively for strange messages. I no longer flinched at a familiar-looking car on the street. My body was relearning how to relax. One weekend, I went to visit my parents. We had a simple dinner of grilled fish and steamed vegetables. My father asked about my work. My mother asked if I was eating well. No one mentioned Julian. That silence was a gift. After dinner, I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets. My father poured me some tea. "You're doing well," he said slowly. "I'm just doing what needed to be done. Not everyone has the courage." I didn't reply. Courage or not, sometimes it's just a choice between being hurt once or being hurt for a very long time. Back in the city, I received an invitation to a professional seminar. Mr. Harrison suggested I present a small segment. I hesitated, then agreed. To stand before a crowd and speak about risk and governance was something I had once done in silence. Now, I would do it publicly. On the day of the seminar, I wore a simple suit and walked onto the stage with a steady heart. I wasn't verbose, I was clear. I gave examples, analysis, and conclusions. When I finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then came a wave of applause, not roaring, but respectful. Afterwards, a middle-aged man came to shake my hand. "Your presentation was very practical. Thank you. I hope we have a chance to collaborate." I nodded. New doors were opening, not in a rush, but with certainty. That night, I got home very late. I sat by the window and opened my notebook. I was no longer writing about Julian. The entries were now about my work, my direction, the things I wanted to learn. I realized that when a person stops looking back, they naturally start moving forward faster. A week later, I got a call from Mr. Pierce. "The case file is now completely closed." "Thank you, Mr. Pierce." Discovered. "Do you want an update on the other party?" "No, that's not necessary." He was quiet for a moment. "You're one of the few people I've seen emerge from a case like this without carrying any resentment." I smiled. Resentment is too heavy to carry. Hanging up, I felt a circle had been completed. Not because I won, but because I was no longer being pulled back. At the office, my team finished our first major report. I submitted it to the executive board. Mr. Harrison replied the same day. "Report is excellent. Proceed with the recommendations." I read the email, my heart calm. That evening, Chloe called. "You've been so busy lately." "I have. But you seem happier?" "I am." "Are you thinking about other things?" "Not work-related." I thought for a moment. "Not yet. I'm learning how to be fully present with myself first." Chloe laughed. "That's more than enough." I put the phone down, turned off the lights, and lay in bed. I didn't need to fill the empty space with someone else. I was filling it with myself. Before falling asleep, I opened my notebook one more time and wrote a short line. Beginning to stand at the center of my own life, I underlined it and closed the book. Outside, the city sank into the night. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I knew I had traveled a great distance when I woke up one morning, and my first instinct wasn't to check my phone. Sunlight streamed into my small apartment, the breeze gently rustling the curtains. I stood making tea, listening to the water boil, and felt everything moving at its own slow, correct pace. There was no bad news waiting, no fear lurking behind every sound. For me, that feeling was more precious than any victory. Work had entered its final stretch. The Midwest project needed a final decision. My team and I worked around the clock, reviewing every detail. The meetings were long, the spreadsheets layered. I was no longer the person standing behind someone else. I stood at the whiteboard, pointing to risk factors. When there were dissenting opinions, I listened, then countered with data. I didn't need to raise my voice. I let the numbers speak for me. One late afternoon, Mr. Harrison asked me to stay after hours. The conference room was empty, the lighting soft, He looked at me for a long time. Are you ready for the next step? Which step is that? Greater responsibility. Officially leading the project. I was silent, not because I was hesitant, but because I knew this answer would change many things. I am ready, I said. Mr. Harrison nodded. Then starting next week, you are the project lead. I stood up and bowed my head slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned it. I walked out of the conference room very slowly. In my mind, an image of myself from 8 years ago appeared. The woman standing in the kitchen, asking for grocery money, hiding a few crumpled bills in her pocket. I no longer resented that past. Without those years, I wouldn't be who I am today. That weekend, I went to visit my parents. This time, I didn't bring worries. I brought peace. My father was fixing the fence. My mother was planting more flowers. I helped her water them, listening to her talk about the neighbors. Small stories that had nothing to do with money or reputation. I suddenly understood that happiness is sometimes just being fully present where you belong. That evening, my father asked, "Are you thinking of buying a house?" "I'm considering it." "No need to rush. As long as you have a place to come home to." I nodded. I knew that this time, my decision wouldn't be based on fear. Back in the city, I received an unexpected invitation. A small panel discussion on women and finance. It wasn't a flashy event. At first, I declined. I didn't want to turn my story into a slogan. But Mr. Harrison said something that made me reconsider. It's not about telling your story. It's about showing how to stand up. I agreed. On the day of the panel, the room wasn't large. I looked at the faces before me, women of all different ages. I didn't go into detail. I talked about discipline, about self-education, about not placing your entire life in someone else's hands. I spoke very slowly. Every sentence was something I had lived. When I finished, there was no loud applause, but a few people stayed behind and approached me. "I'm in a situation similar to where you were," one young woman said, her voice trembling. "Don't be hasty," I replied. "Prepare first." I didn't offer promises or empty advice. I just gave them the one thing I had lacked, the truth. That night, I went home and opened my notebook. I wrote about the panel, about the looks in their eyes. I realized that when you stand firm, you can become an anchor for others, even if just for a moment. A week later, I received an email from Julian. Not a plea, not an accusation, just a short message. "I've left. Thank you for not destroying me completely." I read it and closed it. I didn't reply, not out of hatred, but because everything that needed to be said had already been said. My final act of decency was to not pull the past back into the present. The project was approved. My team began implementation according to our plan. Work swept me along, but it didn't make me lose myself. I learned to rest properly, eat well, and maintain healthy relationships. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. One evening, Chloe came over with a small bottle of wine. "Congratulations, project lead." She smiled. "Thanks. Do you feel empty at all?" I shook my head. "I feel full." "Full of what?" "Full of the things I never used to have." We talked late into the night. No one mentioned the past. We talked about upcoming trips, about small plans. Before I went to sleep, I stood by the window and looked at the city, the lights reflecting on the glass. I saw myself in the reflection clear, undistorted. I was no longer running, no longer chasing. I was living in the present, and that was difficult enough and beautiful enough. I opened my notebook and wrote the last entry for this section. No longer a person weathering a storm, but a person who knows how to build a roof. I underlined it and closed the book. Tomorrow, I would start something new, not to prove a point, but simply to continue. I stepped into the final morning of this journey with a very different state of mind. There was no longer a sense of waiting for something to happen, nor the anxiety of having to be on guard. I woke up, opened the window, and let the sun fill my familiar apartment. The city outside was still noisy, still hurried, but I was no longer swept up in its current. I stood still at the center of my own life, observing everything with a calmness I had never known before. The workday began like any other. I arrived at the office, greeted everyone, and sat at my desk. My team was in sync. Without many words, everyone knew what to do. I looked at their young, focused faces and saw in their eyes a trust, not in me as an individual, but in the way we worked together. That meant more to me than any title. At noon, Mr. Harrison invited me to lunch. We didn't discuss projects or the past. We talked about ordinary things, reading habits, how to maintain energy during long workdays. Before we stood up, he said one short thing. "You've been through enough. The rest is about living well." I smiled. I knew it wasn't praise, but a reminder. That afternoon, I completed the final quarterly report. When I hit send, I no longer felt a surge of anxiety. I knew I had done my best. Whatever the outcome, I would accept it. This was a hard one, definite kind of maturity. After work, I didn't go straight home. I walked for a long time through the crowded streets. I saw hurried faces, couples arguing in low voices, vendors calling out to customers. I suddenly realized that everyone is carrying a story. No one is completely happy, and no one is completely miserable. The difference lies in whether they dare to face and take responsibility for their own choices. That evening, I went home early, cooked for myself, and put on some soft music. I ate slowly, without looking at my phone. I let each moment pass fully. After washing the dishes, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook that had been with me through this entire long journey. The first pages were filled with dense, hurried script. The later pages were sparser, the handwriting more even. I turned to the last blank page and picked up my pen. I wrote, "Not fast, not slow." I wrote as if I were speaking to myself. I have walked through a broken marriage, a period of being controlled, a time of standing on the sidelines. I was once afraid, silent, and thought I had no choice. But it turns out a choice always exists. It was only a matter of whether I had the courage to look it in the eye. I paused, took a deep breath, and continued writing. I didn't win against anyone. I simply took back my right to live my own life. I closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer. I didn't need to write in it anymore. This story had reached its natural conclusion. Before going to bed, I called my mother. "I'm okay, Mom." "I know," she said. "I can hear it in your voice." I hung up, turned off the light, and lay down. No overthinking, no reminiscing. I fell asleep quickly, deeply. The next morning, I woke up and began a new day. There was no climax, no drama, just a normal day for a person who had learned how to live normally after many storms. And for me, that was the greatest achievement of all. Dear listeners who have accompanied me until the end of my story, how did you find today's tale? I'm curious about the impression it has left in your hearts and the thoughts it has sparked in you. Please feel free to share your impressions and opinions in the comments. I will carefully read each of them. The likes and subscriptions you give me are the greatest source of strength and motivation for creating better stories in the future. Please don't forget to do so. I sincerely wish that your life is always filled with happiness and good fortune, and that the warm light in your hearts never fades.